The courtroom was full that morning. Reporters filled the back rows, and the air buzzed with quiet whispers. Everyone had come to witness what had become one of the most talked-about trials in the country. Officer Rick Dalton sat in a suit beside his lawyer, his face pale and expressionless. The man who once barked orders and carried arrogance like armor now looked small and tired. Cameras clicked, recording every moment as the judge entered the room. General Marcus Hawley sat silently in the front row. He wore no uniform that day, only a simple black suit. He didn't come for revenge or attention. He came because he believed truth should be seen through calm eyes, not anger. He had never spoken against Dalton in public, though he had been asked countless times for interviews. His message had always been the same: respect is not optional. As the hearing began, the prosecutor presented the video that had been shared around the world. Everyone in the room watched in silence as the screen showed the moment at the funeral. The officer pointing his weapon, the general standing still, and the crowd gasping. Even Dalton lowered his head. The judge's face showed no emotion, but his tone grew heavy as he said, "No excuse can justify this act." One by one, witnesses were called. The pastor who had led the service described how the peaceful ceremony turned into chaos for a few moments. "It was the most painful thing I've ever seen at a funeral," he said softly. A man of honor was disrespected in front of a flag and a coffin. Several soldiers also took the stand. They spoke not with anger but disappointment. One said, "We teach young men to respect anyone wearing a uniform, no matter who they are." What happened that day went against everything we stand for. Their calm words hit harder than any loud accusation could. Dalton's lawyer tried to explain that his client had made a mistake under stress. He argued that the officer had been tired, that the situation had confused him. But when the prosecutor showed Dalton's long record of complaints, small cases of disrespect, rude comments, and ignored warnings, the courtroom grew silent again. It was clear this wasn't about confusion. It was about attitude. Then it was Marcus's turn to speak. He stood slowly, his posture straight but relaxed. Every camera turned to him, yet he didn't look at them. He looked at the judge. His voice was calm and deep, carrying across the room without effort. "I didn't come here to seek revenge," he said. "I came because this moment is bigger than one man or one mistake." When a person wears a uniform, whether it's blue or green, it carries a promise. A promise to serve with respect, to protect with fairness, and to act with honor. That day, that promise was broken in front of families, children, and the memory of a fallen hero. The judge nodded slightly, listening closely. Marcus continued, "We cannot change what happened, but we can learn from it. Hate grows quietly when respect disappears. And if one man believes he is above others, then no one is truly safe." The room stayed quiet even after he sat down. Some people wiped their eyes. Even the prosecutor looked moved. It wasn't just what Marcus said. It was how he said it, without anger or pride. When the closing arguments finished, the jury left to decide. The wait felt long. Dalton stared at the table, his hands shaking slightly. He whispered something to his lawyer, but no one could hear. Marcus stayed still, eyes on the flag behind the judge's seat. He wasn't thinking about punishment. He was thinking about change, whether this trial could help others understand what respect really meant. After several hours, the jury returned. The entire room stood as the foreman read the decision. His voice trembled slightly as he said, "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts." Dalton closed his eyes. His lawyer tried to speak, but the judge raised a hand. The courtroom went silent again as the judge began to speak. This act was not only disrespectful but dangerous. It was not made in confusion, but in arrogance. And arrogance in authority is the first step toward injustice. He paused, his voice low but firm. The law cannot ignore such behavior, especially when it happens in front of those who gave everything for this country. The sentence was clear: life imprisonment without parole. The sound of shock filled the room. Some gasped, others whispered. Dalton sat frozen, his lips trembling. For the first time, he looked toward Marcus. Their eyes met briefly. Marcus didn't glare or smile. He simply nodded once, almost like a silent message. Learn from this. Outside the courthouse, hundreds of people waited. Reporters held microphones, cameras flashed, and people cheered for justice. When Marcus finally stepped outside, everyone surrounded him. They wanted him to speak, to give a grand statement, to express anger or victory. But he only said a few words. Justice is not about revenge. It's about respect. Then he walked away quietly, leaving everyone stunned by his calmness. The story spread across the world again. News anchors praised his dignity. Social media filled with messages calling him a hero, not for his medals, but for his self-control. May said he had reminded people that true power lies in calmness, not force. Within weeks, police departments across several states began updating their training programs. Videos of Marcus's testimony were shown in classrooms and academies as lessons about humility, respect, and responsibility. A few officers who had once laughed at sensitivity lessons now watched in silence. Realizing how important those values were, Dalton's name faded into silence. But the memory of his act continued to serve as a warning. In prison, he wrote letters to apologize. Some said he changed. Others said he was simply trying to feel less guilty. But the world had already moved on, focused instead on the lesson Marcus had left behind. Months later, Marcus returned to the same small town. The cemetery was quiet again. He walked slowly between the rows of white stones until he reached Sergeant Ross's grave. The grass was neatly trimmed, and a small American flag stood beside the headstone. Marcus knelt down and placed fresh flowers beside it. He stayed there for a long time, speaking softly as if talking to his old friend. "It's over now," he said. Justice was done. People learned something from that day, and that's what matters. You didn't die in vain. The wind picked up, carrying the sound of rustling flags. Marcus looked up at the sky. It was clear now, bright and calm, the opposite of that cloudy morning months ago. He could almost feel peace in the air. Before leaving, he looked one last time at the flag above the cemetery. It moved gently, reflecting sunlight like a promise renewed. A few weeks later, the town held a small ceremony. Veterans and townspeople gathered again at the same spot where everything had happened. This time, there were no cameras, no reporters, just quiet hearts. A plaque was placed near the entrance of the cemetery. It read, "In memory of those who stood with honor, even when others did not." Marcus was asked to say a few words. He spoke slowly, his voice steady as always. The world can be harsh sometimes. People will make mistakes. But what defines us is not what others do. It's how we respond. That day, I could have shouted, but silence was stronger. And in that silence, truth spoke louder than any weapon. Everyone stood in silence for a few moments after he finished. Then a child stepped forward, a little boy holding a small flag, and placed it beside the plaque. The crowd smiled softly, realizing that even the youngest among them understood what the moment meant. As Marcus walked away, the sun was setting behind him, painting the sky gold and red. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He had already left something behind that would last far longer than headlines or speeches, for years to come. Teachers would tell the story of General Marcus Holley, not the war hero, not the decorated soldier, but the man who stood calmly at a funeral when hate appeared, and who turned that moment into a lesson for a nation. His strength was not in his medals or his rank. But in his silence that spoke of dignity, and in that quiet town, whenever the wind blew through the cemetery and touched the flag above Sergeant Ross's grave, people would pause and remember the day when justice, respect, and courage met, not in battle, but in peace. It was a cloudy morning, the kind of day when the sky looks tired and the air feels heavy. People moved quietly through the cemetery gates, dressed in black, holding folded flags and white flowers. A funeral was being held for Sergeant William Ross, a soldier who had served his country bravely and lost his life in the line of duty. The small town had come together to say goodbye. General Marcus Hawley stood near the front, his eyes calm but filled with deep sorrow. He had known William since they were young. They had grown up in the same neighborhood, played baseball in the same field, and later served side by side until life took them on different paths. Marcus was now a respected military general, known for his discipline and kindness. Yet today, he was simply there as a grieving friend. He had come to pay respect, nothing more. The sound of soft music filled the air. Families held hands, and children whispered questions they didn't understand. The soldiers from the honor guard stood straight, their uniforms neat, rifles resting beside them. The pastor began to speak about bravery, loyalty, and sacrifice. The crowd listened quietly, each person lost in thought. Just as the service was reaching its most moment, a police car pulled up near the gate. The loud sound of the engine caught everyone's attention. Out stepped Officer Rick Dalton, a man known around town for his rough attitude and arrogant behavior. He was supposed to be controlling traffic outside the cemetery, but his ego often made him look for power where it wasn't needed. He adjusted his sunglasses, scanned the crowd, and frowned when he noticed Marcus standing with the soldiers. Dalton's eyes narrowed. He didn't recognize the general's uniform or the badges that spoke of years of service. What he saw instead was a man who, in his small mind, didn't belong there. He began walking toward the group, his boots crunching on the gravel, disturbing the quiet that had filled the moment. People started whispering, unsure of what was happening. Marcus noticed the officer coming closer, his steps firm and filled with unnecessary authority. He stayed calm, thinking maybe the officer was there for security. But when Dalton stopped right in front of him, the truth became clear. "Hey, you!" Dalton said loudly, breaking the silence of the ceremony. Heads turned immediately. "You don't belong up there with them. Step back." A few of the soldiers glanced at each other, confused. The pastor paused his words. Marcus turned slowly to face him. His voice was steady and respectful. "Officer, I'm here to honor my friend. Please keep your voice down. This is a funeral." But Dalton wasn't listening. He stepped closer, his tone sharp. "I don't care who you think you are. You're not supposed to be standing near the honor guard. Back off now before I make you." The crowd began to murmur. People could feel the tension rising. Marcus took a slow breath and replied, "I'm not causing any trouble. I'm here to say goodbye. Let's not disrespect the man we're here to honor." That only made Dalton angrier. He didn't like being spoken to calmly. His pride wouldn't allow anyone to answer him with such control. "Don't talk back to me," he snapped, his hand moving toward his belt. "Last warning." A woman in the crowd gasped. Another man whispered, "He's pointing at the general." Marcus remained still. His eyes were calm, his hands steady by his sides. He didn't shout. He didn't move. He simply looked at the officer and said quietly, "Son, lower that weapon before you regret it." Dalton hesitated for a second, confused by the authority in Marcus's voice. It wasn't fear that froze him. It was the realization that the man in front of him wasn't afraid. Before the situation could get worse, two other officers who had been watching from a distance rushed forward. "Rick, what are you doing?" One of them shouted. "Put it down. That's General Marcus Hawley. Dalton blinked, his face turning pale. "General?" he repeated, stunned. The name hit him like a wave. Every soldier, every veteran in that cemetery knew the name Marcus Holly. The man had served in multiple missions, received the Medal of Honor, and was respected by the entire military community. The moment was already captured on several phones. A few people had started recording when Dalton raised his hand, fearing something terrible might happen. Now those same cameras caught the scene of an officer being stalked by his own partners. The other officers quickly took Dalton aside, removing his weapon as he stuttered excuses. "I didn't know, he didn't." But no one was listening anymore. Marcus stayed silent, his heart heavy not with anger but with sadness. He looked at the crowd, then back at the flag-covered casket. Slowly, he turned to the pastor and nodded for the ceremony to continue. The pastor, still shaken, cleared his throat and resumed the service. But the quiet had changed. Everyone there knew they had witnessed something that would be remembered for a long time. By the time the funeral ended, whispers had turned into questions. "Did you see what happened? He pulled a gun at a general. Someone recorded it." The truth was already spreading faster than anyone could stop it. Marcus didn't speak to the reporters waiting near the gate. He simply saluted the flag, placed his hand gently on the casket, and whispered, "Rest easy, brother. I'll make sure your day of honor won't be remembered for hate." When Marcus finally left, several people approached him to shake his hand. Some were soldiers, others were ordinary townspeople who felt ashamed of what they had seen. He accepted their words quietly, never raising his voice. That evening, the videos went viral. News channels across the country began showing the footage. The officer pointing his weapon, the general standing calm, the crowd shock. People couldn't believe it. A decorated military hero had been threatened during a funeral, a moment that was supposed to be about honor and respect. The nation's mood shifted from sadness to outrage. By midnight, calls for justice were everywhere. The mayor released a statement calling the act unacceptable and deeply shameful. The police department announced an emergency suspension. Investigators began reviewing Dalton's record and found a long list of complaints that had been ignored for years. But Marcus didn't want revenge. When reporters found him the next day, standing outside his small home, he told them quietly, "This isn't about punishment. It's about teaching people what respect really means." His calm voice spread online, and soon he became a symbol of dignity in the face of hate. Meanwhile, Dalton's life began to unravel. His arrogance had blinded him for years, and now it was all coming to light. He was placed under investigation, his badge taken away. The same people who once laughed at his cruel jokes now avoided him. Back in the small town, people returned to the cemetery. Some placed flowers not only for Sergeant Ross, but for what the day had revealed, that true honor isn't worn on a badge or uniform, but carried in the heart. As the sun set behind the rows of white stones, the wind lifted the small flags beside them. The sound was gentle, almost like a whisper. It carried the weight of everything that had happened, the fear, the shame, and the quiet courage of a man who stood for peace even when faced with hate. And though the world outside buzzed with headlines and debates, those who were at the funeral would never forget the moment a general stood tall, unshaken, teaching everyone there a silent but powerful lesson, that real strength comes from calm, not anger, and that respect is the highest form of justice.